Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the final panel with scholars and artists held in conjunction with Printing the Revolution, the Rise and Impact of Chicanographics, 1965 to now, an exhibition that brings together 5 decades of printmaking by Chicanx artists and their cross-cultural collaborators. I'm E. Carmen Ramos, acting chief curator and curator of Latinx art at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, and I'm proud to have organized this exhibition and delighted to greet all of you tonight and excited to share news that tomorrow, May 14th, SAM reopens again, giving our local audiences the opportunity to see the show in person. Please visit our website for more information about our hours and how to secure your free ticket. Um, I'd also like to announce that for local and non-local visitors, we'll be launching an exciting virtual tour of the exhibition coming soon. And we're really excited that the exhibition will be visible to viewers outside of the Washington, D.C. area. And if you're not signed up for our newsletter, where you'll find out more about the virtual tour, please sign up for that, and more information will be in a link in the chat. Before we get to our program, we want to gratefully acknowledge the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home in Washington, D.C., the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we convene, and the labor of people who were enslaved in constructing the historic building that is home to the Smithsonian American Art Museum. We welcome our viewers to reflect and honor the Native communities in their own region. Tonight's conversation, Creating in a Digital Sphere, focuses on an important and unique aspect of our exhibition, which includes born digital art meant to circulate on the internet and on social media platforms, computer graphics presented in public space, and multimedia graphic installations that explore the impact of tech culture on communities of color. From the onset of our research into printing the revolution and in acknowledgement of the over 50-year period our exhibition covers, we were eager to understand how technology has shaped activist printmaking and graphic arts more broadly. Building on the examples of important exhibitions like the 2004 edition of the San Juan Polygraphic Triennial, we wanted to lean into how technology has shaped graphics today and how it has allowed the goals of activist printmaking in the 1960s to continue through different modes of communication and community building. I'm pleased that Claudia Zapata is leading tonight's conversation. Zapata is a curatorial assistant at SAM, who is a critical member of the curatorial team for this exhibition and has brought a keen eye to our exploration of graphics. Zapata is a doctoral candidate in art history at Southern Methodist University. They received their BA and MA in art history from the University of Texas at Austin, specializing in classic Maya art. Claudia has curated exhibitions at Mexicarte Museum in Austin and other Texas institutions. They have published articles in Panhandle Plains Historical Review, Jolas, Aslan, Hemisphere, and El Mundo Zurdo Siete. Their recent essay, Chicanx Art in the Digital Age, is featured in the catalog for Printing the Revolution, the Rise and Impact of Chicanographics, and is already an important essay in the field that covers new ground. It's been a privilege to work with them on this project. Claudia will first share some of their reflections on our topic, and then we'll introduce our panelists, who will each speak about their own trajectory. That will be followed by a discussion, and then I'll rejoin the program and open the floor to audience questions. Please remember to use the Q&A function to submit your queries. Thank you for joining us, and I welcome Claudia to our virtual stage.
Thanks, Carmen. I'm going to start sharing my screen now. Okay. So the digital turn is defining a moment for Chicanx artists that prompts new artistic forms, methodologies, and inquiries. In the research and development for the Printing the Revolution exhibition, we recognize the need to expand our interpretation and incorporate graphic artworks situated within digital innovation. In doing so, we acquired digital animation, works fabricated by new technological production methods, born digital art, or works produced entirely in a digital format, and augmented reality prints. These new additions fit within a broader history of digital, post-internet, and transmedia art history that blur the previous parameters of Chicanx graphics and their primarily screen print object-based classification. An early digital creation is Barbara Carrasco's 1989 computer-generated animation Pesticides. The Public Art Fund invited her to present a digital animation work on an 800-square-foot billboard in the middle of New York's Times Square. Working with an animator, Carrasco's Pesticides electronically shouted the harmful effects of chemical pesticides, following their path from a dust cropper spraying fields to a farm worker picking grapes and falling ill, and finally to consumers' rejection and subsequent boycott of the poisoned grapes. LA artist Daniel Gonzalez recreated the paper-cutting effect characteristic of Mexican papel picado using computer-based laser technology at the interdisciplinary design studio Second Wind. Gonzalez's print commemorates the 40th anniversary of self-help graphics and their annual Dia de los Muertos, or Day of the Dead, celebration that Chicano artists and communities began observing in the 1970s. Rupert Garcia, one of the most renowned graphic artists of the Civil Rights era, now creates digitally based works printed at Magnolia Editions. The inkjet technology to print this work consists of a non-impact method where liquid ink prints a vertical row of pixels to capture high-quality, vivid color prints. His 2010 print, Obama from Douglas, exemplifies Garcia's now preferred printing practice as he steps away from the physical demands of screen printing. In this new digital work, he continues the use of diptych and triptych formats to invite viewers to ponder the relationship between images, such as abolitionist and first high-ranking Black U.S. government official Frederick Douglass and Barack Obama, the 44th President of the United States. The Internet and Web 2.0, a broad term denoting a web iteration defined by user participation and interactive experiences, results in a major shift for Chicanx art due to the social network boom in the aughts. These emergent technologies facilitated a wider networked image distribution for political advocacy known as shareable graphics. Chicanx shareable graphics are digital images disseminated online to aid in solidarity efforts and create digital allyship, building online communities often for marginalized communities. In 2012, Julio Salgado used the microblogging site Tumblr to reach out to undocumented and queer communities for his I Am Undocuqueer project that highlighted immigrants' intersectional identities as both queer and undocumented. Chicana artist Fabiana Rodriguez created the Mi Cuerpo Yo Decido, My Body I Decide graphic to advocate on social media for reproductive and women's health rights leading up to the 2012 U.S. presidential elections. In 2018, Lalo Alcaraz posted his I Stand With Emma image after high school senior Emma Gonzalez gave their impassioned speech on live television advocating for stronger gun control. He then posted it on his social media channels asking people to distribute it online or download a high-resolution file from his website for personal printing. This redirect to an artist's website for downloading print files is standard practice and was in full force during 2020. As a result of COVID and the quarantine, digital downloads for protest images were central to artist solidarity with Black Lives Matter uprisings and indigenous communities, such as Mexico's Otomi communities that were disproportionately affected by the pandemic. The Oakland-based collective Dignidad Rebelde oscillates between digital and print works, with member Melanie Cervantes pushing for downloadable posters via Facebook since 2009. Barraza has been a leading figure in digital skill sharing with fellow Chicanx artists and communities since 1998, when he co-founded 1012, a collective of digital artists. Chico Gonzalez employed augmented reality as an additional narrative layer to viewing his works on paper. Users access the enhancement by downloading an app to activate an overlaid video interview recording. The Salam image triggers an oral history with Mexican-Pakistani activist Saida Islam, discussing the beauty of the Islamic faith and how she feels that her identities as both a Muslim and Mexican are constantly under attack. A pivotal theme for Chicanx artists is the critique of technological industry's adverse effects on BIPOC communities. The self-identified Tecnocrítica Bay Area collective Los Hybrids challenges the presence of surveillance technologies and the corporeal realities of biotechnological exploitation in their 2001 digital mural Manifest Tech Destiny. Their advocacy against digital labor's inequities and the gentrification of the Bay Area by the tech industry is unfortunately still relevant today. Edward Snowden's 2013 exposure of the National Security Agency's mass surveillance of Americans and 2018's Cambridge Analytica scandal revealed improper use of personal data. These significant crimes against users reflect the continued need for national governments to define users' data rights as a human rights issue. The ever-advancing automation and violation of individual rights within the digital sphere is a significant focus for tonight's featured speaker, Michael Menchaca. Michael Menchaca is a de-indigenized Latinx artist based in San Antonio, Texas. He received his BFA from Texas State University in 2011 and his MFA from the Rhode Island School of Design in 2015. He's been an artist in residence at the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture, Vermont Studio Center, the Serre Project, the Segura Art Studio, the studios at Machaco, and is scheduled to begin a residency at ArtPace San Antonio later this month. Menchaca has exhibited at the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, El Museo del Barrio, the Davis Museum, North Carolina Museum of Art, the Chrysler Museum of Art, the McNay Museum, and the International Print Center, New York. He was a 2015-2016 Visual Arts Fellow at the Fine Arts Works Center in Provincetown, Massachusetts, and a recipient of the 2018 National Association of Latino Arts and Cultures Fund for the Arts Grant. Our first speaker, Julio Salgado, is a visual artist who happens to be undocumented and queer. He is the co-founder of Dreamers Adrift and the Artistic Leadership Program Manager for the Center for Cultural Power. His status as an undocumented queer artivist has fueled the contents of his visual art, which depicts key individuals and moments of the DREAM Act and the migrant rights movement. Undocumented students, organizers, and allies across the country have used Salgado's artwork to call attention to the migrant rights movement. He's the co-creator of the Disruptors Fellowship, a program for emerging television writers of color who identify as either trans, non-binary, disabled, undocumented, or formerly undocumented immigrants. His work has been displayed at the Oakland Museum, SF MoMA, and the Smithsonian American Art Museum. Now I welcome Julio to the virtual stage. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for that welcoming. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Play. Ooh. And play. It's an honor to be, to be in conversation with Claudia and Michael, and just to be part of this amazing show. I had the opportunity to go check it out in person, like right before they closed again. And, it was just to see it and to feel it. It was just amazing. So thank you for that. And I wish I could go back soon to DC so I can, see it again. But I'll tell my friends that it's opening again. I'm so excited about that. So I want to share a little bit about some of the work, that I've done through the years. One of the images that I always like to share is this image. As Claudia mentioned, I'm undocumented, and I think a lot of the times the narratives around immigrants focus entirely on the young ones. Even though I'm almost 40, because I qualify for DACA, I'm still seen as youth, which I don't mind. But it's important that narratives include folks who don't qualify for DACA, like my parents. And so this image was based on this photograph that my family and I took around the time that we moved to the U.S. In the mid '90s. And for me, and this image was created in collaboration with my good friend and organizer Nancy Mesa, who has also been pushing for migrant rights. We met when we were trying to push for the Dream Act, and the narrative was that we were used because like we used that the narrative of like America, forgive me, it wasn't my fault that I'm undocumented. It was my parents' fault. They're the ones who brought me to this country. They're the ones. They're the reason why I'm in this situation. And if you think about it, that narrative, it really throws our parents under their bus, right? And so I think that for a lot of us who started, pushing for the Dream Act, which would have allowed undocumented immigrants like myself to, get a green card if we went to college, and if we joined the military. To prove like our goodness, right? But as we have seen, the Dream Act first came out in 2001, right when I came out of high school, and throughout this time, we haven't seen, a lot of legislations change. Yet the narrative, was sticking around, and so like all of a sudden, the few policies that did pass, like DACA, only benefited people like myself, but it left out my parents. And so, we wanted to make this image, to pay homage to people like my parents. I mentioned I came here in the mid 90s, 1995 to be exact, and in 1996, I was put in this art class where my teacher introduced me to the work of this person who y'all might be familiar with, Frida Kahlo, and I became obsessed. It might sound like a cliche for a brown artist to name Frida Kahlo as a big influence, but she really was. I was a 12-year-old kid who did not want to be here. I was old enough to be like, no, my friends are in Mexico. I wanna stay over there. But seeing her work, I was just, it touched me, right? It really did something in me. And it has really, her influence has really, gotten into my work. The image that, the piece that one of the pieces that I showed at the, that is part of Printing the Revolution is Quiero mis Squaresday, which was, very based, off of this image. I made this piece when I turned 30, and it was about me wanting my quinceañera, which is, in our culture where, girls get this amazing party. And because I was a boy, and this idea that, you don't get to you can't wear a dress and, have chambelanes, I didn't quite understand, right? And so like, I put that idea into this image, and also this idea of like, right, like being what is a man, what does that mean? Gender, what does that mean? Not being man enough, not being, all those things. And so I wanted to put it into that image. I think a lot of the work that I do, and we're gonna get into it, but it really has been a lot about collaborations. When I was in college, we started the zine called El Reflejo, and it was really about wanting to share our stories, right? Like, right, nobody telling us, nobody a small budget, like literally nothing. We would throw parties on the weekends, so we would charge our friends, and that's how we would print the zine. But really, it was like our stories about being undocumented, being queer. And I'm talking about, like the from 2000, 2004, 2005, 2006, before, you saw this wave in 2010 of people coming out of the as undocumented. In 2010, that was a pivotal year for immigrant rights movement, because this happened. In 2010, I mentioned this, the Dream Act, undocumented students sat in McCain's office, and they were like, if you're gonna talk about immigration, you need to make sure and, see us. So we started coming out of the shadows. That's essentially how we started calling it. And I remember seeing this photo on my Facebook feed, and I was like, oh my God, what are they doing? Because up to this point, we were used to other people talking on our behalf. Sometimes, a lot of the times bad, and sometimes to protect us, right? Allies were like, you shouldn't be telling people that you're undocumented because you might get deported, your family might get deported. But if anything, what they did, they switched the whole narrative, and they were like, no, you're gonna see us. And what I, when I actually studied journalism in college, and I did a lot of editorial cartoon and political cartoons, and so I was out of college by this time. I was out of college, 2010, and I was like, I need to make sure and document what was happening. And so the saying "undocumented, unafraid, and apologetic" became the main phrase that we were saying. And if out of those five people that you saw sitting down, four of them identify as queer like myself. And so I really wanted to be super intentional in reminding folks that, hey, this movement, a lot of the people who are behind it are queer. And I don't know who came up with this term undocuqueer. I saw it coming in my timeline, but I thought it was like such an important a word where you were talking about two issues, right? About being undocumented and queer, because around this time in the queer community, all people were were talking about was gay marriage and joining the military. And then in the immigrant rights movement, you were told not to share. We had a lot of religious folks, and you were told not to share about the gay agenda. And so to me, I was like, no, we need to make sure and include and for me, it was paying a homage to the people that made me feel safe to come out as both undocumented and queer. The butterfly symbol became a way to talk about migration, right? Like, wouldn't it be beautiful if if there was no borders, right? And what would that look like? I know I might not be, during my lifetime to see no borders, but as artists, we get to imagine that, right? And then as a queer man, being called a mariposa, which is Spanish for butterfly, it's kind of like being called the F word, right? And I was like, yes, I'm a beautiful butterfly, and I wanted to include that in my art. I make my art very colorful, very queer, if you haven't noticed. As I'm, moving around and finding different ways to share my art and collaborate with other folks, I'm very close to Hollywood, and I grew up. I learned English watching Friends, Will and Grace, and so I'm a fan of TV. And so, TV shows have used my artwork, specifically Vida, which was created by Tanya Saracho. Not only did she ask me, if they can show my work, but she actually asked me to be on it. Like, so if you see, like, I forget, it's like episode 4, you like pause it for like 3 seconds, you can see me in the background as an extra. But what I saw that, when we were filming, that it took many hours, but I was like, the reason why a lot of other people have the wrong perception of who the other is because Hollywood is super influential, and who tells or how our stories are told, right? And so for me, it was like, how can we create programs, mentorship programs, where like writers of color who want to write for TV feel like they can access those people who can give them mentorships. Because for me, having mentors meant everything. Fabiana Rodriguez, Lalo Alcaraz, who are part of the show, are my mentors. And so I wanted to make sure and recreate programs like this. And so it was mentioned the Disruptors Fellowship was started as a way to do that, and so we just announced our new fellows for this year. And for us, in order for us to disrupt systems like Hollywood, the fact that I'm in this show, Claudia came to my house and saw my work. It takes people, the curators, the showrunners, to get to know the people that are creating. And so for that, we need to invest in the artists, not when they're making it, but before they're making it, right? And so like that's the reason why we started Disruptors, to disrupt different systems where we can tell our stories as people of color, as immigrants, as queer people. So I'll end it there. You can find me on my IG, Julio83, which is my digital gallery and where I'm always sharing new work. I'll pass it to Michael.
Thank you, Julio. All right, let me share my screen. Okay, thank you to Carmen and Claudia Zapata for organizing this landmark exhibition Thank you to Tatiana Reynosa, Teresita Romo, and Claudia again for their contributing essays. Harriet and Ricardo Romo, Gilberto Cardenas, and Dolores Garcia, Tomas Ibarra Frausto, and others for donating to the collection and making this exhibition possible. I'm grateful to have this opportunity to speak with my co-printmaking colleague, Julio Salgado. And I also want to mention that I'm born and raised in the indigenous home to Coahuiltecans, and this is also the same community that Claudia grew up in. So I just want to give out a shout out to those watching from San Antonio. My artistic practice is founded on disrupting popular racist narratives targeting Black and Indigenous people of color using print media and new media formats to generate anti-colonial, anti-racist, and anti-capitalist visions of the world. As a de-indigenized Mexican American born and raised in San Antonio, Texas, that is, a community with colonial roots in military and civil policing practices promoting anti-Black, anti-brown, anti-native, anti-trans, and imperialist narratives, I, like many Texans, am constantly mediating the internalized racist and colorist beliefs embedded in me by the legacy of white supremacy in the Americas. I became aware of this cultural alienation from my Mexican heritage and my assimilation into the dominant narrative of colorblind racism when I was enrolled in the undergraduate art program at Texas State University. It was here that I experienced increased moments of racialization and minoritization by my peers and professors at the historically white institution. As a means of expressing a set of mixed emotions, ideologies, and histories affecting my perception of self, I sought to create a lexicon that would codify my lived experience as an index of composite digital patterns, glyphs, figures, and symbols evoking the energy of Mixtec manuscripts from the 15th century. This was the first screen print that I did with a now somewhat famous mustache-wearing cat. It was designed in Adobe Illustrator, then each layer was exposed and printed onto a 26-inch by 40-inch sheet of French paper. This would become my breakthrough series of prints called the Codex Migratus, and so this is me hand printing it with a one-arm press squeegee in order to get the pressure even. And so I started to think about my cultural alienation from my Mexican ancestry through migration. And through the symbol of the stray cat, I could express the complexities of the history of mestizaje and attempt to gain empathy in viewers. I sought to preserve significant events affecting me and the greater Latinx community as allegorical and digitally rendered imagery that would allow for multiple interpretations by viewers without access to my intended meanings. I turned to the codices as a generative model to express my racial awakening in pictographic terms, connecting my practice of precision digital drawing with ancient American expression. Since 2010, I've amassed thousands of vector digital drawings that have been translated into various mediums, including screen prints, digital prints, paintings, digital animations, and new media installation environments, recalling the hyperbolic, gridded pictures of ancient Mexican codices. Also incorporated into the digital codex are cultural influences from my upbringing growing up in the 80s and 90s. So I just want to point out that this is an installation of my undergraduate thesis at Texas State University and how similar that is to the presentation at the Smithsonian, which Harvey did a great job in assisting in the technical aspect of this installation. So hyper-patriotic video games marketed to young male gamers promoting the war on drugs and the U.S. role in the Vietnam War, World War II, and the Cold War were filled with violent imagery, sexually suggestive themes, and colonial fantasies. Paul Ortiz introduces the term emancipatory internationalism to express the idea that if my neighbor is not free as I am, then I'm not really free, and this is the founding principle of coalition building against white supremacy. Around 2016, I began incorporating narrative imagery addressing the concerns of the Black community as a means of expressing co-ethnic solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. I've redrawn elements from arcade games such as user interface designs, character designs, and motion graphics properties as vector graphics that approximate the visual density of the ancient pre-Columbian manuscripts as a way of conflating ancient American pictographs with the ongoing gamification of racialized oppression. My most recent work has been researching the socio-technical infrastructure of online surveillance platforms and how these practices explicitly target the so-called users for attention and to move them towards commercial and political ends, while extracting as much personal data about them as possible. Mobile devices gave birth to the attention economy, surveillance capitalism, and coded inequity. Private companies like Amazon have developed facial recognition technology that are being used by police agencies, U.S. intelligence agencies to expand discriminating policing practices, perpetuate surveillance, and infringe on our civil liberties. Amazon's facial recognition software targets certain faces as criminals and others as trustworthy based on biased datasets embedded with gender bias and racial bias. It can detect white male faces with almost 100% accuracy, as we saw in the case with the Capitol rioters. And when it comes to faces of color, they are often misidentified as criminals who are of a different identity. States are now recruiting communities of color to reach unprecedented capacities to surveil, criminalize, and oppress our most historically marginalized communities with the aid of big tech. The goal here is to keep communities anxious, fearful of one another, and dependent on the criminal punishment system that disproportionately incarcerates BIPOC communities. Without meaningful public backlash, it becomes possible for fascist armies of automated drones and robocops to be deployed by the state, lubricating the mass incarceration machine and maximizing settler colonial capacities for racial and social control. I characterize our current conditions as a neo-colonial digital caste system, a high-tech evolution of white supremacy operating through the invisible digital architecture that permeates our daily lives. In this way, the cultural genocide of previous generations continues to flourish, unnoticed. Dr. Ruha Benjamin defines our current industrial revolution as the new Jim Code, defined here in this slide, which brings me to my most recent projects. So this is a print series called La Raza Cósmica 20XX, and I'm hoping that there could be a link in the chat box to reach more about these works. So this is a reinvention of the casta painting tradition of Spanish colonial Mexico, depicting the various racial combinations as family portraits that the miscegenation in the New World led to the new racial mixtures, and they were defined by the Spanish crown. So what I've done is reinvent this form and surrounding the families with big tech pictograms to suggest their technological colonization. As I continue to research the interwoven histories of European colonization, U.S. slavery, mass incarceration, and the increasing socio-technical deployment of online surveillance, predictive policing software, it's become apparent for me to represent these shared histories as interactive experiences using digital technology in order to subvert their colonial agency. Within the context of an art exhibition or public intervention, I'm searching for ways to amplify abolitionist content through the co-optation of Silicon Valley gadgets and digital advertising practices in the intention of disrupting the logic of American racial capitalism. A Cage Without Borders, this work here, hijacks the commercial appeal of motion graphics on social media platforms in order to critique the U.S. carceral state. This piece is a 3-channel video installation playing a synchronized HD animation on 3 TVs that are vertically oriented, mimicking the presentation of mobile devices. And so this work is on view in Estamos Bien in New York City currently. And also tied to the exhibition is an online project called heisthewall.net. You can visit that website and learn more. So a brief description of that piece is it's a website based on the 45th president's promise of a wall very much like the apartheid wall in Palestine. So if we continue to ignore the ongoing legacies and consequences of settler colonialism, we're going to continue to further dehumanize and erase each other. And I want to just take a moment to say, especially after the week of increased violence in Jerusalem, that I stand in solidarity with the Palestinian struggle and call for an end to the Israeli occupation in Palestine. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Michael. Julio, if you could join us, we can start a discussion. Great, thank you. Well, thank you so much for walking us through your practice. And so let's take a little time to start from the beginning. So you both started out primarily working in print in some form. Julio, you were a political cartoonist for your school at Long Beach Community College, and Michael, you were primarily a printmaker at Texas State University. So, how did you begin to embrace technological strategies into your art making? Julio, why don't you start us off?
Sure. Yeah. Again, thank you everybody who's here for this conversation. I mean, for me, it honestly, it was about what was easier to do with the technology. To be completely honest, it took me forever to get in, to use an iPad because I was like, no, I need a sketchbook. I need to draw by hand, and it's just the technology that you needed to use to in this case Photoshop, right, like to scan my editorial cartoons, and you needed a system. And so, but through that, I really started embracing it, and really discovery. I mean, there's so many things that you can do in Photoshop. I don't know it all. I know the basics of Photoshop, but it works for me. A lot of people are like, you should use Adobe Photoshop or Illustrator. It might be easier, but Photoshop works for me, so I'm gonna stick with that. What even further than that, my first, like one of the first computers that I had, that I got through a scholarship. I couldn't afford a scanner, and so I would take a picture of my drawings with the photo booth thing, and then I would send it to a Photoshop program that I had. And so it really became about as things were becoming more accessible, and I just embraced it. And with the rise of technology, Facebook, MySpace back in the day when I was in college, to share it more easily, that was for me, was like a no-brainer, or maybe I wasn't thinking about it, and I was just like, well, this works, and I've embraced it.
Yeah, I remember you telling me about your kind of workarounds to avoid using the rest of the Adobe suite. Like you knew what you knew, and that's it. That's because it was about speed, really.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's very like when being in I was in a community college. It was a weekly paper, and then when I was Long Beach, I transferred to Long Beach City College. It was a daily newspaper, and so it was just about the speed. I needed to come up with drawings every day, and so it was just very convenient. You know. And yeah, but that's all up to even to now, there's only so much I know about Photoshop. I could not teach a class on that.
Okay. Okay.
Don't ask
Okay.
me more questions about Photoshop.
Good. Good to know. And Michael?
It's very similar to me. I mean, for me, because I think accessibility to tech was not there for me in the beginning. When I started going to school for graphic design at SAC, San Antonio College, that's when I started learning more about what programs were being used in the industry to make drawings digitally. Because prior to that, I thought I could be an illustrator by hand, and that there was some like romantic notion to making things by hand in tangible formats, and like have like I guess the fine art realm, or that whole idea for me overshadowed like the digital art realm at that point. But once I picked up the pen tool in Illustrator, I really started to see the possibilities of expressing myself through this program that has like precision digital drawing embedded in it. So like I got really good at rotoscoping, like drawing, like tracing over JPEGs essentially, and converting them to vector graphics. And then that's when I started building a library of images that spoke to my experience growing up in South Texas and having this like Chicano like ideology that I didn't know was there. But through the digital, I could express a frustration that was there all the time. And the more I learned about the oppression of Mexican Americans and like Latinx folk in the U.S. and then wanting to put those invisible histories, make them visible, but using this workflow that I was taught in a graphic design program. So yeah, it was about like speed and like making an image every day, like that artist like Beeple, who is doing the NFT stuff now. But there was a point, I think like 2009, 2008, somewhere there, where there was like a make an image a day kind of craze, and so I jumped on that kind of like practice for my own like vocabulary to expand and evolve, and that's what ultimately led to the codified like pictograms that the Mixtec codices like do so well.
Yeah, I remember that. That was you had a blog.
Yeah,
The
I had a blog that was my initials MCM, which is like 1900 in Roman numerals, and I wanted to live up to that idea of like 1900 vectors, and I think I have fulfilled that, like, but not, it's not like cataloged that way anymore. But that initiated, I think, the growth or the perpetual evolution of my imagery.
right, right. Yeah, there's also that connection to kind of access to these technologies as really from both of what you're saying is it was kind of later in life because I think we all were kind of restricted by public schools and the access to certain hardwares and things like that. And like the image editing softwares are pretty heavy duty, and the kind of access to like a public computer is very, it's very basic. Or if you're at a library or something like that, you don't have time to really tinker with technology, which is where you have this kind of success and what y'all have done, later in life.
Yeah, there was so I think my high school, and I think you went to the same high school, Roosevelt High School in San Antonio. They had a magnet program that would teach students, high school students, to do digital art, and I think they taught the Adobe Creative Suite, as it was called back then. But I didn't have access to that because I think it was divided by class. Like only a certain class of student had access to enroll to that program, and so I remember like seeing them in passing and being like feeling like I don't want to say the word jealous, but seeing like that I didn't feel like I was being offered that kind of opportunity. So I started to subordinate myself and feel like well that inferiority complex, that the colonial mindset that's embedded, especially in colonial communities like San Antonio, where people of color don't see themselves as equals to the white dominant culture that's taken over. So it just made me feel like this isn't for me. Like let me do something else. But I came around eventually when I went to college.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go to this next question that I have for y'all. So this is kind of about legacy. So the political graphics you both create comment on issues such as immigration, prison industrial complex, and white supremacy. These such themes have been at the forefront of many BIPOC artistic communities for generations. So how do you see yourself continuing the struggle? What are some of the consistent points of oppression that persist, and what are new critical points of activism you would like your artwork to promote?
I can mention something on that. I mean, when I first started, in college, I there wasn't, and I'm talking specifically to the undocumented experience, right? There wasn't a movement like as open as it is now, right? People were not freely talking about being undocumented. If anything, we were just like, don't tell anybody. But I was like slowly using, being in the school newspaper, and I would like, interview undocumented students, starting undocumented, or we started an undocumented organization. And so I was like, I remember seeing Exit to the Gift Shop, and I was like, you know what? We need that. We need to like, street art and put our stuff out there. But my reality versus, the artists, that we saw on Exit Through the Gift Shop, me being a brown man with shaved head, and putting art there, and being undocumented, I was like, I was putting it into my art, right? Like I was putting those experiences in my art, and then using this technologies to share it. But initially, it was about convincing people that we were good Americans. I pay taxes. As Michael has refer to, like, this colonized idea of like, I have to figure out how to be accepted, so that the general public accepts me, right? And when we say, the general public, we really mean, like, a lot of times white people feeling comfortable with immigrants. What is the best way for me to make white people comfortable with with my immigration status, right? And so, like, that was the art. Where I'm at now, I think, we just went through an administration that was heavily, like, anti-immigrant, in your face, didn't care. And so I'm like, where I'm at right now, I need to make art where, like, I'm not gonna convince people, if in the past 20 years that I've been doing this work, I haven't done it, it's not gonna do it. So, like, why spend that energy on that? And so, like, for me, it's like putting artwork that, highlights immigrants, like the happiness, because within the system, there is happiness. Immigrants, we're not just our status. That is a reality that we need to face. But, like, I also am, there's other things, there's other facets that, I don't feel is shown in a lot of art. A lot of immigrant art is super sad, super, focused on the no's, right? And so, like, it's really hard to focus on the yeses when you have these things happening, but there are yeses. I grew up with a dad that was hilarious, and I use a lot of humor into my art because I grew up, seeing that. I'm more than the things that, people want me to, to be. So, yeah.
What were some of the artists that you were looking at when you were when you're developing your artistic practice and you're commenting on these themes of migration rights, and, like, who were these, like, mentors?
Yeah, there was the mentors. I met Fabiana. When the SB 1070 was happening in Arizona, Fabiana was organizing artists, taking them to the border. Through her, I met Emory Douglas, and she's like and I learned a lot of these folks, like, later in my life, right? Like, they were not teaching me the work of Emory Douglas in high school, right? Like, they were. I wanted to move to New York to become Andy Warhol. That was my plan. But it really took people like Fabiana to introduce me, like, to other folks that, and the legacy that they left, that they've had, right? And so, people like, and like Fabiana, and other artists that, like, were mainstream at that time. MIA was a huge influence, for me in college, because, like, she was talking about, like, I'm gonna steal your jobs, I'm gonna steal, like, making fun of the idea, that people have about immigrants. And so, like, the way that she was, like, being super, like, like, putting her art together, her music was very influential, to me. And to have people like Fabiana, people like Lalo Alcaraz, who were using journalism, to touch on this subjects, were huge for me. And to actually get to, meet these folks, I haven't met MIA, but, like, to have Fabiana, go from mentor to, like, now she started the organization that I'm part of, the Center for Cultural Power. I tell folks, I'm like, reach out to your favorites, reach out to those people that you admire, because you'll be surprised who will reply to you, and, we'll answer the questions. Like, I learned so much, and I'm like, how can, all the things that I learned, we need to pass them on.
Yeah. And Michael?
Mentors, artists that I was looking at when I was at Texas State, like, formulating the screen prints, were Kara Walker. I was looking at Trenton Doyle Hancock, Enrique Chagoya, definitely. But I also recognized that they were doing something that was different than what I had to offer, because I felt like my work had a digital sensibility that their work didn't have. And also my identity as, like, a San Antonio based, like, Latinx artist, and that identity isn't really present, or wasn't at that time, widely, like, represented in the contemporary art world. And so I felt like there was a space for me to address my experience that was different from those artists' experience, and that I had something to say involving the digital, like, workflow. I did end up communicating with Trent Doyle Hancock. He juried me into a show early on in my career, And so I continued like an online relationship, asking questions here and there. Sam Coronado was also helpful with inviting me into his residency program in Austin and doing a print, and seeing how his shop was set up really made me see that it was possible to have like a DIY setup, that you didn't have to depend on like institutional funding or like a big warehouse to have a print studio. And so just seeing like printmakers of color, seeing how they can make a studio set up for themselves in their homes, and with different alternative materials, really I consider to be inspirational. And also ran into Fabiana Rodriguez. She came to RISD as a visiting artist, and I helped her with a print series that she was working on. So through that connection, I feel like connected to you, Julio, and we touched base once in San Francisco during the Southern Graphics Council. But yeah, those are some influences.
Oh, this is great. We really need like a data visualization to show all the interconnectivity amongst everybody. Okay, so let's talk about source material. So you both create vivid digital collages in your body of work, citing popular culture, mass media, and advertising. So how do you source your material, and what are your methods for digital excavation, criticism, and reevaluation of this media content? So Julio, let's go to you, because I that's kind of really what you're very well known for doing this, and like rethinking Friends, and it's like at a national scale people latch on to your rethinking and your sourcing of popular culture. Why don't you walk us through that?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's about reimagining the things that I didn't see growing up, right? Yeah, so I made a series called POC TV Takeover. And there are all these reimagined illustrations of shows like Friends, Will and Grace, and Sabrina the Teenage Witch, Gilmore Girls, shows that I grew up watching, right? And to me, this shows were I mean, I'm a kid of the '90s and the early 2000s, and so I have a deep connection with them, but like thinking about a show like Friends, right, which is a show about six people that hang out at a coffee shop. But people fell in love with them because why? Because they were three dimensional, right? Like they had writers, they had lives, right? Where whenever you had characters of color, you would they would be super flat and super like not they were not completely there, right? And so like I really took, because art, visual art or drawing was my prime, tool. I started doing that, and that specifically, I did that in 2015 because there was a new Star Wars movie, and you had a black lead and a woman lead, and people were bananas. They were like, PC culture, they just want to turn into like everything PC, and which to me was like, it's like a little kid who has all the toys and doesn't want to share, right? Like I was like, I thought, to me that was funny that grown men were complaining about this, and I was like, I'm really gonna take. They were like, you're stealing our culture, which I was like, I didn't know Star Wars was your culture, but okay, I'm like literally gonna do that. And so like and the fact that people vibe with that, like I think a year later, JC came up with a video where he like rethink the cast of Friends with the like an all black cast, right? And so like this idea, like I'm not the only one who has done this, but people are, it's not hating on the shows, it's not hating on that, like that's what it was, that's what the 90s were like, that's what we grew up watching, right? But like, can we think about other stories that that reflect our communities as well? So that's pop culture has it's my job.
Yeah, I remember you mentioning Spin magazine.
Oh yeah.
I was asking about the frontality of your figuration, and you'd mentioned magazines.
Yeah, I mean, Rolling Stone magazine and Spin magazine were, like I initially, Michael, you should remind me that I did actually took a graphic design class like for half a semester when I was at community college, but because I didn't have a computer at home and I couldn't keep up with with that, like I stopped doing it. But yeah, like though, like I was like in my mind, I was like I wanted to do ads, and so my images are very like I see them as little ads or little commercials, like little that's my mind goes there. I see billboards, poster like that, like it's CD covers. That's all like how I think about when I'm creating something. Very colorful, and Daria and The Simpsons.
Mhm.
Oh, that's like Michael.
Well, I was gonna say I can't forget to mention Nickelodeon as a huge influence on my upbringing. I just saw this documentary that's on Hulu called The Orange Years, and it's all about Nickelodeon's history, and there's so much nostalgia in that. But I think seeing like animated characters that were really like nonconformist in a lot of ways, like in being represented as like different color like skin tones and even some that eventually came out as being queer, like Ren and Stimpy, and I think SpongeBob also. But seeing that kind of I guess early diversity and with the cast of all that, being a diverse group of actors and people of color on that cast, I really like started to see myself in this like creative sphere. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I forgot what the question
Well,
was. I got lost in
we were
Nickelodeon.
do- we were talking about source materials, especially with your work. There's like a barrage of content from the ancient to the arcade video games, and then
Yeah. Yeah,
it's so
so
many things.
there's a
Talk.
lot of crossover. And we can talk about this for like a long time, and I wish we could, but I'll try to keep it short in that it's the imagery that I pull from is a lot of it is from like memories of a personality that was represented, or like I call them archetypes that are represented in video games as like I showed in the slideshow, but like people of color depicted as enemies, for example, or like as like more animalized, like subhuman enemies. And then the animated attributes of that character, like the sprite animation, how I could redo that motion graphic, even if it's like a stop motion animation. I can redo those like 3 or 4 frames that really gave that character that brought them to life in the scope of that video game, and how much that those like 3 sprites reflected like racialized threats in that world, the usually the white protagonist inhabited, and is fighting off like these like people of color that are enemies. um so I embed those kinds of symbols into the work, which people may recognize, they may not, but I think they understand. They're reading into it because they've already been processed by other people in the past for other reasons, but I'm recontextualizing them to challenge those histories and that legacy, which is based in white supremacy. But bringing that kind of like presentation to co-opt it and subvert it and challenge it, because like I said, like the MO in San Antonio is to be complacent, and I was raised to be to laugh off racism and just remain quiet and uphold the status quo, and I'm done standing being neutral when injustice happens. Like Desmond Tutu says, if you stay neutral in situations of injustice, you've chosen the side of the oppressor. So now I'm trying to raise awareness of the importance of digital literacy and racial literacy, and marrying those two in in works and workshops if I can.
Great. Okay. Well, I think that we need to cut it off there, and now we're going to go to the Q&A. So if we could bring Carmen back. Thank you so much for this. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you, Claudia.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, the three of you, for such a wonderful and robust conversation. Um, we've been getting a lot of questions. I have a few of my own. But let's take this question first. Thank you all for this wonderful discussion and for your brilliant artworks. I'm curious how you think, how you all think about planned obsolescence and how quickly technology disappears. I love the references to MySpace and blogs. Do you think about preservation or rejecting traditional notions of preservation within art making?
I mean, I think about this all the time, right? Because yeah, I mean, that's what we have. I have a website. I'm like, I'm gonna keep a website so I can, keep my work there because you never know. I can't. I don't have access to my MySpace anymore. So those drawings that I posted there, they're lost because I was also a horrible organizer of my own work. But I think about this, in terms of like how are we making? I mean, the fact that y'all chose my work to be part of this, it's a great way, way to like make sure that people know that we're around and that this comes from a legacy, right? Like this is nothing like new. The technology is new, but like there's a legacy from where we get inspired from. But that's, I mean, I all I can say to that is like archive your stuff. You have to be responsible for like archiving your own stuff because yeah, technology is changing all the time. And luckily right now the one that I'm that it's been working for me, and it's it hasn't, I don't see any sign of it just yet to like stop Instagram. And I think as visual artists, I think a lot of people who have traditionally being kept out of spaces where you show art, that's how they've been able to show their work. And I think that that was important for me during when I started sharing my work. Right, I mentioned the wanting to go out in the streets and becoming a street artist, but like being scared of getting caught by the cops. But I had access to sharing this with so many people, connecting with other undocumented folks around the country. And even though I can't physically get out of this country just yet, because even though I have DACA, I still don't have permission to leave the country and come back. I can connect with other people outside of this country. And so like it definitely has built a global network, but it definitely has its ups, and as Michael explained, like it's extremely downs and the dangers of these technologies.
I want to echo what Julio said about archiving your own work. Like if you don't do it, no one else will do it. But I also want to raise the problem that archiving and like documenting your work can also become a colonial project in itself. In that if you're so obsessed in the studio or wherever your creative activity takes place, with the photo, the documentation of the piece instead of the ideas behind it, then you can easily become distracted and in that sense be more obsessed with the attention economy, as they call it, of trying to generate as much attention through your labor, instead of actually putting the work into the creative process. So yeah, I think there's like a double-edged sword with archiving your work, but I think institutions like the Smithsonian provide a great opportunity for those artists who have visibility online with an online portfolio, um, be it Instagram or a website, that their work then becomes archived by an institution, and I think that's incredible.
Yeah, it was something that, Claudia and I really, really thought about as we worked on this exhibition, the importance of preservation. I mean, generally speaking, with all art forms and Latinx art in particular, which is so often not part of museum collections, right? And I always think about it as being part of the Smithsonian and how this collection is really the true patrimony of the United States, right? It really represents the fullness of who we are. So it's incredibly important to preserve these objects. And then with born digital art, there's this other added dimension of its precarity, right? Actually, right? We think that it's ubiquitous, it's going to be around forever, but if an artist shuts down their website, that may be gone, right? So it's very vulnerable, actually. So it's really important that we collect this work and preserve it over time. I have another question, and I'm going to combine it with one of my own questions. So it says, for Michael, are there any installations of your art here in San Antonio? I'm loving the use, reuse, modernization of the codices images, and I did want you to talk a little bit more about the relationship between your work and what led you to turn to codices. It's a fascinating aspect of your work. And for Julio, I wanted you to talk about the relationship between your graphic work and your performative work. We're also familiar with your Undocumented and Awkward series. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the relationship between those different modes of creative expression.
Should I go first?
Yes, Michael, why don't you go first?
So I turned to the codices when I was an undergrad, and as I mentioned in the slideshow, that I was feeling increasingly racialized, being that I was going to school 30 minutes north of San Antonio, where I'm born and raised, and just realizing the culture is different. And then so I went to the library one day. And discovered the Mixtec codices. I think it was a reproduction of the Codex Borgia or Natal. And then I started reading into those images, not knowing what the definitions were. I think there was some text, but I didn't look at the text. I was a student. I was like pressed for time. And I was also like hungry, like looking for images and absorbing like influences, as a good student should. But I felt a connection there, like that was visceral, that felt like it was beyond just me, but I felt like a cultural like connection to the imagery. And I felt like me having a digital like background, a digital like drawing sensibility at that point, I encountered something like a framework that I could build off of and continue that legacy of drawing and documentation of like events. But I could preserve my own reality, my own lived experience through the same type of drawing practice, but embed it with my own symbolism, my own definitions, and have fun with that. Because it was like a creative outlet. My whole life I was told or I was treated like I was like an inferior, and oftentimes that's still the case. But with drawing, and especially through this like digital drawing practice, like I felt so empowered and so emboldened to express myself and to be fearless. So I felt like I encountered something new, and that could also connect to my video game upbringing, inspiration.
Thank you, Michael. The mixed medium, right? That using, you mentioned the videos, and the with the art. With that, so we start a media sort of a website called Dreamers Adrift, and I started that with my best friend, creative partner Jesus Iñiguez, who you met, Claudia and Carmen, when we went to go film. And essentially, the mixing, drawing and we kind of created like humorous sketches. Was because sometimes a drawing for me, like, it wasn't enough. Like I was like, I want to say something, but I couldn't. Like a drawing wasn't, or you couldn't, tell it, through a drawing, right? And so we started making this like, sketches where we would bring in other undocumented folks, to kind of make fun of the system, and sort of, again, focus on the like daily boring, sometimes exciting things that undocumented immigrants, go through, from dating to the things that don't make it to the 6 o'clock news, right? Like the things that we live on the daily, and find the humor in it. And people, a lot of folks, especially undocumented folks, really connected, with some of the issues that we were talking about. Like, one episode it's about, why are you 25 years old and don't have a driver's license, and the awkwardness, the conversation that comes with that, not feeling like an adult. And so there's a lot of that, and for us it was, we the audience that we had in mind was other undocumented immigrants, because again, right, like there's this idea that in order for your art to be successful is that the mainstream media has to accept it, but there's 11 million undocumented people. That's a lot of people. And for us, that was the audience, right? Like the audience that there was also this and this happens a lot, for when it comes to like documenting and video work. You have people from outside the communities who come in, and they use you as they treat you as a subject. And for us, it's like, no, like, I'm gonna tell my own story in my own terms, and that involves drawing, that involves humor, that involves video work. And so it's worked, and people, we collaborated with so many other artists. And I agree with what Michael said, and in terms of like, it's not just about you and like your thing, right? Like for us has been a lot about collaboration with other people in our community. Like if you're not collaborating with the other folks, especially when you're touching on these subjects, like, you need to expand that. Like it's not a one person show.
You. There's another question that's come in that it was very long and we tried to synthesize it a bit. How do you come to terms with opposing ideals within a movement? How do we allow for representation from different perspectives? Anyone want to try that one?
This is something that us dreamers adrift, think about this all the time, right? Right now there's so much information and things, and things change, with times, and I'm pretty sure some of the things that we enjoy now are going to be potentially problematic in the future, but this is the time that we're living in. And so I think it's important to to, like, for example, the coming from I'm a good immigrant, accept me, right, to the sort of like, I don't care about what you think about me, right? Like that's two very different things that I had to go through it from my own experience, right? I went through that narrative. So I'm not gonna be one to be like, if somebody just wants to focus on being a good immigrant because that's the narrative that they want to share, fine, like do it. There's language, there's space for everybody. One book, one drawing, one movie is not gonna cover every single person or every single movement. And I think that is important to have different voices. Now I'm not talking about like voices who are just like, I don't know, like citizenship is the answer, like, or whatever, but just being open to having layered narratives that for every movement. So I'm open for that.
I think there's always the possibility for infighting, like within any movement, and I think it's just a matter of finding common ground and empathizing with one another, listening, and not being too hard-headed, because like Julio said, is like maybe values change over time, and some people may not be aware that they may have problematic like favorites that take away from other people's ability to achieve equity. So it's just a matter of being open and understanding.
And if I can add to that, like, I mean, with this, yeah, problematic favorites and people that make mistakes, right? Like you can have a conversation, but then there's just people who don't want to listen, and like they just continue to do problematic work, or like they just don't learn from those conversations. Then I'm like, okay, you're on your own here, right? But there is that possibility of having conversation. I know that, like, one time, like, for example, I'll give a quick example. Like I was doing a workshop with older gay Mexican migrants, and I used the word, joto, which is like the F word in Spanish, and people, and like some of them were like super offended that I have that word in my work. And they were like, you don't understand, like, we migrated because people used to call us that in Mexico. How dare you use that and call it art? And I was like, no, but it's different. Like, we're trying to take back words and like change the meaning. And what I learned from that is that I didn't have the language. They were, I walked out of there, as times change, you have to be ready to have that conversation, especially people from different generations, who had to deal with some other stuff, right?
Thank you. I have a question about printmaking. So it says, I see that Michael worked with Overpass on a recent project. I'm not sure if Julio is working with presses in LA, but wondering if they can comment on the experience of working with presses versus printing work themselves.
Michael, you're the
you
master printer.
okay. So I've worked with a few printmakers, starting with Sam Coronado, with the Print at Serie A project, and Julie Samuels most recently with Overpass projects for La Raza Cosmica and a few of the other prints. I gotta catch them all, and it's been great working with a collaborative printmaker who's willing to invest the time and labor into making your work, seeing it through and seeing it true to your vision. In my experience, because I've been very I have very tight registration. Let's just say, like in my screen prints, like I design for very minimal wiggle room in terms of like where the black outline falls on a character, and like you can see like there's like a very thin outline around like a character's face, and that has to be spot on. So to have a printmaker who's willing to commit to that accuracy is really difficult to find. So I've felt like I can trust those printmakers who like have that goal in mind to see these prints like come to life, and two, be willing to spread the messages of equity that are inherent in the drawings themselves. And so I feel like you kind of have to know a little bit about the printmaker and have a conversation about like technical accuracy or what you want. But it's been my experience that as long as those conversations are had like in the early stages, then you won't encounter any problems down the line. But it's been different because it requires a lot more what's the word, patience, and that I don't normally have in other people, but patience is a big part of that collaborative spirit.
Yeah, I mean, I trust other folks because my favorite part about printing is like actually designing the screen and like actually cut the film. But I don't. That's not my forte. That's not my strength. And so like the image that that is at display right now was I designed and everything, but it was printed at Tana in at UC Davis. Carlos Jackson, like help out with that. Where he did the prints, and so like I'm just thankful for people who like wanna collaborate with printing my work. Another person that I work a lot with, Chucha Marquez out of Oakland. You should follow their work, La Chucha, on Instagram. Because yeah, like they're I get very intimidated when it comes to that because there's some precision that I just I go like this, and so I'm always honored when people want to work together. And yeah, it's all about also like on the vision, like people when they take their time is like, well, how do you want it, and like let's do it this way, or like let's do it the other way. I trust fully on having that conversation and working from there. Yeah, I'm very intimidated printing my stuff. I've done some prints myself, and I I need more learning. I need more practice.
I used to think that only I could make the prints that I like design because I spend so much time like blocking out any pinholes that get exposed, like little pieces of dust. I spend hours, like maybe a whole studio day or two, to block out that stuff so that when it prints, it's all nice and digital or digital looking at least. But yeah, it's really difficult.
And also I mean, to collaborate with somebody that is willing, like sometimes you just have to walk away from things and have another perspective to make sure that that's the like that they bring another perspective to the work that you're doing. So I love collaborations with other printmakers. Yeah.
We just have a few more minutes, so I'm going to ask each of you a question from the audience, and then I have one last question that I want to ask. So the question for Michael is, Michael, can you please explain some of your images about digital white supremacy in more detail? And for Julio, your question is, let me get to it. It says, Julio, can you talk a bit about the fat bodies in your artwork depicts? I've been thinking about your work and the late photographer Laura Aguilar lately, and I appreciate the fact that fat bodies populate some of your works. You can quickly
Yeah,
answer those questions.
I think the question is addressing the Cage Without Borders, the most recent work that most explicitly addresses digital white supremacy, and it's really a way to put a stamp on what is already being optimized on the internet, which is the the idea that white people embody the normal cultural population, and which is not true, but that's been the ongoing vision of Hollywood and other entertainment industries. And so labeling it with these catchy, like, attention seeking graphics brings attention to that process, and so and it's a way to bring a question in the viewer and say, like, isn't it interesting you don't see abolitionist messages presented on these platforms because it's not going to help the bottom line of these the social media's bank accounts. Essentially, like, these are private companies that it really doesn't benefit them to fight for equity. And so putting the words, I think, in one image, there's the words, it said whites only, comes out in this, like, graphic text in the video, and you haven't seen a graphic text that says white only in like a digital ad, because it's too confrontational, it's too maybe challenging of the system. But I'm willing to put those images out there to draw attention to that history.
And in terms for me, in terms of like the bodies, or the type of bodies that I put in my work, I think it's very directly inspired by my own experiences. Being a cis gay man, when you go to a bar, you're at a club, like, what do you see? If you Google the word gay man, it's usually cut, muscular guys, and while they exist, there's also people like me, and there's people who come in different sizes. So it's really about, like, well, this is how people really look like. This is how my friends look like. The other part that also comes, or that I was super inspired, or that started really making me think about the way that especially like gay men designers and the way that they talk about women's bodies. I remember seeing the movie Real Women Have Curves, and like really like thinking about, like, how am I recreating those things by the things that, oh, I'm a gay man and I'm allowed to talk to women and tell them what they need to wear, or they need to, like, lose weight, or this and that. And so, like, really thinking about my own problematic behaviors of the past, even though, like, I don't have the perfect body, right? And so, like, that's what's comes from like things that I wasn't seeing, or the things that I was seeing and I was not in agreement with. And my way of dealing it, as always, putting on the art.
Thank you both for your responses. My question is really thinking about our exhibition, and when I first started thinking about organizing this exhibition, it was really informed by the fact that Chicanx graphics arts has been excluded from the histories of American printmaking for the most part. And this project has been, a labor of love, but also one of necessity, right? Of the need to correct that and to intervene in to challenge those exclusionary narratives. And I wanted to know, just from the perspective of you both as artists, what exhibitions should we be organizing, as curators, as institutions, that is inclusive of your work and the work of BIPOC artists? I'd like to sort of hear about, based on your experiences over the course of your careers.
More exhibitions on intersectional identities and intersectional struggles, definitely, but ones that not fall into the trap of reinventing previous group exhibitions, but instead are founded on original BIPOC ideas that express the intersectional struggles.
Oh my God, so many things, right? But because these are, the folks that I'm in community with, I'm part of this group of like undocumented filmmakers who have been, documenting in their own way, right? Like I talked about my work, with Dreamers Adrift, but there's amazing folks like Armando Ibanez who, created a web series called Undocumented Tales. There's so many folks, who did this, and I actually did like a small version of that called con cámaras y sin papeles, or with cameras and without papers. And there's just so many more folks around the country using cameras to tell their story, and very, different. Like they're like. They're different genres of film. So I would love to see something like this. So tell me if you wanna, I'll put you in touch with all these filmmakers because they're amazing and they're out there and they're doing the work.
Well, thank you both for such an engaging conversation tonight. Thank you, Claudia, for leading the discussion and for being such a critical part of the success of Printing the Revolution. I also want to thank all the people that have made this program possible today, all of our colleagues at SAM, Bridget Callahan, Carlos Parada, Jessica McFadden, Kaylee Bryant Greenwell. And I also want to thank really the entire SAM family who put so much time and effort to make Printing the Revolution a reality. And finally, starting tomorrow, people will get a chance to see the show. So I'm just very excited about that. And I want to celebrate that, achievement, and that finally we'll have an audience. So our show will be open through August the 8th. Please continue to tune in to our website to see the launch of the virtual tour. And thank you for joining us this evening. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Thank
Yay, there goes a catalog.
Yes.
Good night, everyone, and thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.